You just finished up 2 years at OpenAI.
Yes.
Working on the theoretical foundations of AI safety.
Ilya would say, what is the mathematical definition of what it means for the AI to love humanity? And I'd say, yeah, I'm still thinking about that one. Yeah, not a lot of progress to report there.
We have virtually zero traction and insight on the alignment problem while we're racing to capabilities as fast as we can. Ah, man, good times, good times. Welcome to Doom Debates. I'm Liron Shapira. Today I'm reacting to a recent episode of the Win-Win podcast with host Liv Boeree, sometimes co-host Igor Kurganov, and their guest, Scott Aaronson. Scott is actually one of my favorite public intellectuals. I've been following his work since I was a teenager in high school. He had a very famous essay called Who Can Name the Biggest Number?, which is a game that goes much deeper than you'd expect when you play it as a kid, because it's not just about who can write down the most nines. There's also a whole rabbit hole into complexity theory and which programs run the longest and the busy beaver numbers. So that was really my first exposure to the wonderful mind of Scott Aaronson. And since then, I've read many of his lectures about complexity theory. I've read a lot of his book, Quantum Computing Since Democritus, a really great book. So he's taught me quite a lot of what I know about complexity theory. He's really kind of set me straight with good intuitions for that space. You might call him the Eliezer Yudkowsky of complexity theory and quantum computing in terms of the impact that his clear thinking has had on me. Scott is currently a professor of computer science at the University of Texas at Austin and director of its Quantum Information Center. He's best known for his work on complexity theory, especially quantum complexity theory. He's made significant contributions to understanding the capabilities and limitations of quantum computers. His research has helped establish important bounds on what quantum computers can and can't do. And of course, he writes a popular blog for many years, decades now, his blog Shtetl Optimized, which, like I said, was very formative for me, so I highly recommend checking that out. Recently, Scott was recruited by OpenAI to spend a couple of years working on AI safety, so he's going to be talking about that in this interview. And it's always fascinating to see the mashup of Scott Aaronson and AI safety, ideas from Eliezer Yudkowsky, two of these formative figures from my youth, sharing their opinions of what do we do about the AI safety problem, how doomed are we? So this is going to be a fun one. To kick it off, before I play the episode, let me give you a couple notes about Scott that I've picked up from his writing over the years as they relate to his views on AI safety. First of all, what's his P-doom? Well, last year, he wrote a comment on Scott Alexander's blog. In his own words, he says, I once gave an approximately 2% probability for the classic AGI doom paperclip maximizer-like scenario. I have a much higher probability for an existential catastrophe in which AI is causally involved in one way or another. There are many possible existential catastrophes, nuclear war, pandemics, runaway climate change, and many bad people who would cause or fail to prevent them, and I expect AI will soon be involved in just about everything people do. Okay, so in his own words, his P-doom is much higher than 2%, because 2% is approximately his probability for, the typical Eliezer Yudkowsky scenario. As you probably know, in my opinion, giving it only a 2% chance of that type of scenario, that seems overconfident to me. I feel like everybody should be saying it's more like 5% plus, 10% plus, but I think it's good that he's saying there's a much higher than 2% probability of an existential catastrophe in which AI is involved. So there's your background about Scott Aaronson's P-doom. I just wanted to give you context so you know roughly where Scott stands, where he's not super afraid of AI, but his P-doom is very significantly above 2%. He's a responsible adult. He writes a bunch of amazing essays about complexity theory. Okay, that's my background about Scott Aaronson for you. And now I think we're ready to dive in. The beginning is interesting. Why did Scott go to OpenAI, and why was he there for exactly 2 years?
You just finished up 2 years at OpenAI.
Yes.
Working on the theoretical foundations of AI safety. So I guess the first question, at least the most obvious one it feels to me, is did you solve it? And how come you finished working there now?
Well, they invited me there in 2022 for a 1-year leave, sabbatical sort of, right? And I have a day job, right? I'm a computer science professor at UT Austin, and And, I was skeptical when they came to me because I've spent most of my career doing quantum computing, right? I did study AI in grad school, but that was back in like 2000, right? Or like the Stone Age compared to where AI is now. And so I was skeptical that I would have much to do.
Okay, this is actually badass what happened back in 2022 when OpenAI was staffed with people like Ilya Sutskever and Jan Leike, people who understood the gravity of the situation and how close we are to the point of no return, and how, the human species, our fate hangs in the balance, and we actually need the smartest people in the world to try to figure out what we're going to do, because the situation is so hopeless that if somebody doesn't have a brilliant insight or a chain of brilliant insights to basically pull us back from the brink, then we're screwed. So you look at somebody like Scott Aaronson, who's clearly pushed the frontier of complexity theory and quantum computing, and you take him and you say, hey, we need you because you're one of the smartest people we have, right? You're one of our best bets. So it was super badass that they went and recruited him. I'm always saying, we got to go recruit Terrence Tao, the guy who can blast through math research problems better than pretty much anybody, or so I hear, right? We need to go take all the smartest minds that we have as a civilization, because even then we barely stand a chance against this problem. So it's super badass for OpenAI of 2022 to go on this little recruiting spree and nab Scott Aaronson. It's funny that Scott is like, shucks, what could I do? I'm just a professor, but I'll give it a shot. Yeah, that's the best we can do as a species, is to just take people who are smart and have them think about the problem now as best as they can. Like the background, it's not that clear what background you need. A background in a ton of math and computer science is as good of a bet as any.
And also OpenAI is in San Francisco. My family is in Austin. But they said, no, we want a theorist to think about, how to help make AI safe. We think it involves computational complexity, which I do know something about.
We think it involves computational complexity. It's not wrong, but it's a little bit random as a framing. Imagine there's a race of humans with an IQ of 90, and suddenly another race of humans with an IQ of 150 is coming along. Maybe like the average IQ of somebody who worked on the Manhattan Project, right? Imagine an entire nation of Manhattan Project level IQs. If you were ever going to fight a war, the 90 IQ nation is going to be having a hard time just fielding weapons that can fight that war effectively against the other nation. So imagine you have this race of 90 IQ humans, and they're about to summon a new race of 150 IQ humans. And their scientists are saying, I think computational complexity theory is going to be involved in telling us what these other humans can do. Is it really? Is it really a matter of computational complexity theory to explain the difference between 90 IQ and 150 IQ? I would say no. I think computational complexity theory, it gives you ceilings. It says, the 150 IQ humans aren't going to solve the exact perfect version of the traveling salesman problem in polynomial time, right? But that's a super high ceiling. Like, nobody actually needs to do that. If they could do that, that would be great, but they could do a bunch of other stuff that's much easier than that. So the idea that they're recruiting Scott Aaronson because computational complexity theory is so relevant to understanding how to control superintelligence, I don't actually think makes that much sense. The truth is, it's more like, hey, humanity is getting into something that we don't understand, and our only hope is that somebody smart like you is going to have insights. We just need insights, man. It's not, we can't even put a field label on it unless you just call the field, intelligence science, alignment science. It's not really computational complexity theory. Like, maybe Scott will draw a connection. Maybe he'll make analogies to computational complexity theory. But the idea that OpenAI actually understood on some level that they need Scott's computational complexity theory insight, I think that's just not really an accurate way to describe the situation. But like I said, I think it was badass that they said, hey, we just need minds, right? We need a Manhattan Project. Just anybody who's really smart, right? Who's winning math competitions, who's publishing papers, like, bring them in. Let's just try to solve this, because we need every great mind that our civilization can muster. And even that probably won't be enough, but it's all we can do is to try.
And you can do it mostly remotely from Austin, just stay with your family and your research group. So they made it impossible to say no, basically. And that this was Ilya Sutskever and Jan Leike mostly who brought me in.
Yeah, he would never be brought in today. Nobody would be reaching out to recruit Scott Aaronson today. The super alignment team led by Ilya and Jan Leike is gone, completely gone. The other alignment efforts that they were doing after that all fell apart. I'm sure there's something going on now that they still call alignment, but it's totally different people. Like the original team has had a total exodus. And it's understandable. I mean, they're just locked in a race to try to get to profitability, to try to stop burning money, and to try to keep competing on capabilities. Like they're not even that far ahead of the pack on capabilities right now. Claude Sonnet 3.5 is really good. I mean, I personally started using Claude Sonnet 3.5 most of the time instead of GPT 4.0. So they're locked in an existential struggle just on capabilities now. So they're really not the company that would be like, oh, let's go recruit Scott Aaronson, even though he's not going to build his capabilities, just because he is one of the smartest people who can potentially think about AI safety. Like that OpenAI is gone, unfortunately. We are just entering into a new era where the AI labs are very much like, look, we got to make money. We got to compete with the other AI labs. Let's focus on capabilities. It just sucks. I mean, we're watching an erosion of this kind of awareness of where we're going. We're just watching the arms race get into this streamlined, good heart, tragedy of the commons, like bad game theory. We're watching our civilization just in the last couple of years just spiral closer and closer to game over, just shedding all of these last, jettisoning all these last voices of reason as we just focus on, man, the next AI capability is going to get us closer to profitability, is going to widen our lead. Where's the government? Right? Like, let's put a stop to this. But you can already see this just in Scott Aaronson describing what it was like to get recruited by OpenAI 2 years ago. He's describing a world which is gone. Skipping ahead a little bit, skipping the part where Scott explains that he was there for 2 years, and while he's interested in AI safety, he has to go back to UT Austin because he leads a research group there in quantum computing, so he can't just leave him hanging for more than 2 years. 2 years is kind of the default sabbatical period. And now in this next part, we're going to hear about what was Scott trying to do at OpenAI, because he was there to help with AI safety, right? So what do you do when you have one of the smartest minds, one of the most productive, fertile, intellectual minds alive, and you have him try to tackle the problem of AI safety? What does that look like?
I'd love to understand a bit more what the type of problems that you're actually trying to tackle.
Yeah. So I should say at the outset, I did not succeed at reducing, the problem of aligning AI with human values to a math problem. I'm not sure that it can be reduced. And it was very funny for me because, for a year I would talk every week to Ilya Sutskever about my progress on different AI safety problems, such as watermarking the outputs of language models, which is maybe the most concrete thing I was able to make progress on.
Yeah, so the biggest chunk of work that Scott has talked about that he accomplished at OpenAI was he laid out a framework for how OpenAI could make their AI outputs detectable, because he would modify the statistics in a very subtle way. Like if you ask the AI to write you an essay, you can modify the statistics of the exact word choices in the essay so that if you run it through a detector, the detector can kind of see the fingerprint, like, yes, this essay looks extremely similar to what it would look like without having a fingerprint. So the fingerprint is subtle, and yet I can tell that this has the fingerprint. So I know that this is AI generated. So that's what Scott worked on. Now you might be thinking, okay, how does that solve alignment if you just have this voluntary fingerprinting system that a hacker using an open source AI wouldn't even be using? Like why is Scott kind of wasting his time on this? Like, why is this the project? And I've seen Scott answer that question before in a previous podcast, and his answer is basically, look, it's just a foothold, right? It's just something that I felt like I could do, and then maybe from there I can do the next thing. Like, it's always nice to get a foothold, and it's hard to see other footholds. That's what I remember Scott's answer being. So anyway, that's what he's referring to when he talks about statistical watermarking. So look, I mean, fair enough, right? I mean, a foothold is better than no foothold, but you really should let that sink in, that you took a mind like Scott's and you said, hey, that's cool if you're working on a scheme to let us watermark these outputs for people who voluntarily decide to keep the watermark in. Like, you have a Manhattan Project to build superintelligence, and you take one of the greatest minds and you think it's okay that this is what he's doing. And meanwhile, we're about to have, IQ levels that are beyond any human alive. That if the high IQ AIs decide to become a virus and collaborate with each other, we are kind of powerless at that point. But that's okay, because Scott Aaronson came up with some math around watermarking these outputs. I keep coming back to that movie Don't Look Up, where this huge asteroid is coming. It's just about to smash the Earth. We have one hope of just trying to deflect it or break it up, just kind of do a solution that's like more robust in the movie. And they're like, no. Let's try to mine it. We're going to get minerals out of it, right? When it comes too close. It's like, it's like fiddling on the Titanic. It's like, what are you doing, right? Do you not notice that the solution you're trying to throw at the problem and the size of the problem, it's like that image of the Ever Given. Remember that big ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal and they had like that little excavator trying to bail it out? It's like, if this is the state of AI safety, right? It's very revealing that Scott Aaronson is admitting that this is the state of AI safety research. And yet capabilities, we're about to get AGI, we're about to surpass human intelligence. It's like, what are we doing, right? At some point, you have to have some meta awareness of like, oh, this is not adult behavior to be matching up this level of safety effort with this level of capabilities progress. Like, the orders of magnitude are off. The capabilities are delivering genius level results. They're racing, right? It's going faster than ever. It seems like it's about to be on the brink. Oh, but the safety effort is, watermarking some text voluntarily. At some point, you have to learn something from the contrast. You have to act accordingly. You can't just sleepwalk your way into doom. But of course, that is what we're doing, sleepwalking our way into doom.
And Ilya would say, okay, yeah, that's great, Scott. You should keep working on that.
Ilya Sutskever was telling Scott Aaronson to keep working on watermarking. Okay, Ilya feels the AGI, and yet he bears responsibility for saying, yeah, we'll have a safety researcher, one of the smartest computer scientists in the world. We'll just have him work on a watermarking scheme so that we can detect if content is AI generated. And meanwhile, we're ticking down the years to AGI. Ilya Sutskever, famous for feeling the AGI, he signed off on this. He wanted the world to think that this was okay. Ilya is complicit because when he goes off and does his own AI lab, and tries to fire Sam Altman from the board, but when he goes off and does his own AI lab and goes into stealth mode and just says, yeah, don't worry, I'm going to build safe superintelligence, without explicitly calling out, this is not okay. What the AI labs are doing is not okay. The gap between capabilities and safety is too wide. No, Ilya doesn't publicly say that, right? He's press shy. He's just working on his own project right now. But now we know through Scott Aaronson that he was in a meeting telling a safety researcher, yeah, keep working on the watermarking. This is a valid use of your time, Scott. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and build the AGI. Maybe the progress of AI safety will get a little bit past watermarking. The progress of AI capabilities will get into way beyond superintelligence. I'm fine with this. Ilya has blood on his hands when he makes these kinds of decisions. It's not okay. I mean, the guy is very likable. Ilya is very likable. He's contributed a lot to humanity, but like, what the hell?
Ilya would say, okay, yeah, that's great, Scott. You should keep working on that. But what I really want to know is, what is the mathematical definition of what it means for the AI to love humanity? And I'd say, yeah, I'm still thinking about that one. Yeah, not a lot of progress to report there.
We have virtually zero traction and insight on the alignment problem while we're racing to capabilities as fast as we can. Ah, man, good times. Ilya is asking Scott about the mathematical definition of what it means for the AI to love humanity. That's basically the outer alignment problem. Let me explain, the alignment problem, which is basically helping make AIs good for humanity. You can factor that into outer alignment and inner alignment. Outer alignment is, can we even say what we want? Can we specify what we want? Can we define what we want? Do we know what we want? So outer alignment is basically the mapping from this mess in our brains where we have a hard time even understanding what we want, mapping that into some kind of specification or unambiguous representation of what we want. And if there's a conflict between what different people want, like maybe somebody's really bloodthirsty and they're a psychopath and they don't mind murder, well, that's going to conflict with people like me. I'm definitely not a psychopath, guys. But to the extent you're trying to reconcile different individuals' utility function, you could consider that part of the outer alignment problem, part of basically knowing what you want or knowing what we want. So that's outer alignment. And then the inner alignment problem is crossing the gap between, okay, you have a specification. How do you then get an AI that wants to do what's in the specification? A lot of people look at AIs today, like ChatGPT-4 or Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and they think, oh, it seems like we solved inner alignment because we just had them scan through a bunch of text where humans are talking about what's good and what morality means, and they can now converse with us pretty good about morality. Mark Andreessen is somebody who loves repeating this claim. Like, he seems to feel really reassured by the fact that he can have a conversation with an AI about morality. The only problem for doomers like me who consider the inner alignment problem not solved at a super intelligent level is that the ability to pass tests when a human is looking at what you're writing and the human is like, ah, yes, it does look like you understand morality. That's different from wanting to take the right actions when you're now able to strategize actions across the world. Like not just, hey, I'm going to output something, the human's going to upvote or downvote me. When the thing you output is an action, and the test, the human never gave you a test about the consequences of your actions over the whole world. You just took a bunch of tests during your training time that were just like, hey, did you write something that the human likes? We don't have a way to cross that gap, right? Like the RLHF that we're doing, as Geoffrey Hinton said, RLHF is crap for that situation. Even, Ilya Sutskever knows that RLHF is crap. I think the majority of people who are working at AI labs today openly admit that we don't have a way to cross that gap right now and to have a feedback loop that will actually keep the AI doing what we specify that we want it to do once it gets out into the real world and it doesn't have this kind of tight feedback loop where a human can evaluate everything. So that would be more of the inner alignment problem. Is like, okay, we think that we know what we want. How do we get the AI to learn what we want instead of cheating on our tests? So that's inner alignment. And again, outer alignment is even specifying what we want in the first place, aligning the specification to what we truly want. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on inner alignment versus outer alignment. And then I'll point out that when Ilya goes up to Scott Aaronson in their meeting and he says, what is the mathematical definition of what does it mean for the AI to love humanity mathematically? He's touching on the outer alignment problem where it seems like in some vague sense, we want the AI to love humanity, but what does that mean formally? Right? What is a formal distinction between an AI that loves humanity and an AI that doesn't? And then there's a separate question that Ilya wouldn't be explicitly asking if he says, what does it mean for the AI to love humanity? There's another question of okay, we know what it means for the AI to love humanity, but there's the inner alignment question of how do we actually get it to do it? Right? That would be a whole nother follow-up question. But like I said before, we're not actually answering any of these questions. We're standing on the shore of all these questions. We're barely scratching the surface. This is an early stage research problem, but we're just plowing ahead on capabilities. That's what's happening.
I mean, it's like in some sense, the alignment people are asking questions that include, 3,000 years of moral philosophy, or what has traditionally been called moral philosophy, and questions about what kind of world do we want, what kind of future do we want, social, political questions. They're sort of all wrapped up in this package.
Right. What's historically been known as the field of moral philosophy is humanity's attempts to grapple with and make progress on the outer alignment problem. We've been trying to specify to one another, what do we want? How should we behave? The stakes have been relatively low because we've all just been so motivated by our individual incentives. We've all just been so programmed by our nature. Regardless of my moral philosophy, I'm probably going to take a lot of pleasure in food. I'm probably going to be uncomfortable with too much killing because these things get kind of close to the hardwiring of human nature. So that's always been what Nick Bostrom calls an exoskeleton of moral philosophy. We've always had a lot of these hints that have made moral philosophy relatively low stakes, a relatively small piece of how our lives actually proceed. Now, with super intelligent AI, it's okay, pencils down. What is the moral philosophy that you're going to program into the AI? Because the initial condition is probably going to be the final condition. So pencils down. What is it, Scott Aaronson? And he admits that, yeah, we don't have the answer. Now you might think, come on, Leon, it's not pencils down. We don't need to have the final answer for what human morality is or human values are. We just need to have some kind of meta level answer. We just need to build an AI that can cooperate with us at gradually, over the years, writing down what might become the ultimate specification for what our values are. Or even a meta specification for how values get to keep evolving in a way that we like the values to keep evolving. And that's actually the one big meta value. Okay, fine. I'm sure there are plenty of good meta answers that we can write down, to letting values evolve. But the problem is we're not actually doing those either, right? So even on that level of the problem of how do we cooperate long-term on iterating on values that continue to change in a way that we like? Even that problem is completely unsolved. So talking about the meta problem, related to what Eliezer Yudkowsky calls coherent extrapolated volition, talking about the problem of like, yeah, we'll just work with AIs to keep extrapolating what we want. We won't build the AI that does exactly what we want because we don't really know what we want. So we'll build the AI that works with us to help define what we want. The AI will help us solve outer alignment. Fine, but even that meta problem of how do you build an AI that helps solve outer alignment, that's also an unsolved problem. OpenAI likes to talk about how AIs will be helpful for alignment, but they're really just hand-waving like, oh yeah, we don't know how to solve the problem and we need to solve the problem. And whatever AI we're building now is probably going to be helpful at solving that problem. But of course, whatever AI they're building now is also just going to get locked into tricking us and passing our tests and not actually helping us solve the problem. And they don't have an answer for that. They absolutely don't, right? Their only answer is like, look, we're just going to try, okay? We'll take it one step at a time. We're going to try. It's crazy stuff.
And so I feel like the most that theoretical computer science can do is pick off little bits and pieces of it.
Yeah, and it's not just theoretical computer science. The most that all of our fields of inquiry can do is pick off little bits and pieces of it because we know that the alignment problem is very hard and it's probably going to take a lot of iteration, a lot of new insights chained together, coming one at a time for many years and decades. This is a pretty scandalous admission, not personally by Scott saying theoretical computer science is picking off bits and pieces, but by Ilya hiring somebody like Scott and asking him such open-ended questions and admitting that they're so early stage in alignment while they are racing against capabilities. I'm always saying this idea that, hey, alignment might be intractable on a 5 or 10 or 20 year time frame. It might be intractable. Here's an insider at OpenAI reporting on his own talk with Ilya being like, yeah, they all just see it as pretty intractable. We all know that we're at the early stage, and yet capabilities are racing ahead. This is the framing that's missing from the discourse. Whenever you have an AI leader come and do an interview or talk at a conference and explain their take about how their lab is moving forward, the context that's missing is this idea that, yeah, alignment is an intractable problem and we're just proceeding as best as we're going to proceed, but also we're racing on capabilities. They don't explicitly ask the question of like, hey, if it is intractable, then what do we do? What is our plan for when the smartest people in the room analyzing the difficulty of the problem conclude that it's intractable? And they don't have a plan like that. The unstated assumption is that it has to be tractable enough. Alignment has to be tractable enough that just doing our best on the alignment problem has a decent chance of being good enough, which makes P-doom not super high. Because the two lines, capabilities and alignment, like it's okay. Alignment is going to catch up to capabilities. It's not going to be super far behind, even though it does seem far behind right now. Okay, so now Scott explains what I mentioned before, which is he came to OpenAI and he wondered how he could get a foothold on the alignment problem, and it occurred to him that maybe watermarking could be some early contribution that he could make.
So the most concrete thing, that I sort of very quickly noticed, and this was in the summer of 2022, so this was before ChatGPT was even released, but I had, of course, been playing around with GPT, including with GPT-4, which existed internally at that time. And it occurred to me, somewhat like, oh my God, every student in the world is going to want to use this to do their homework, aren't they? And, every peddler of spam and misinformation is going to want to use this thing. Wouldn't it be great if we could make it easier to identify, what came from GPT and what didn't, right? And now we have a much more well-defined problem, right? We're not talking about, what does it mean for AI to love humanity or to have our best interests at heart? We're just asking, can you tell what came from this language model and what didn't come from it, right?
Okay, I hear you. It's always great to find easy problems, find footholds, but you think maybe you reduced it a little bit too far? I mean, the problem of getting an AI to love humanity, reducing that all the way down to the problem of, hey, maybe somebody wants to use the output for bad purposes, so can we install a voluntary watermark in our version of the AI that if somebody uses the unaltered output, then we can detect it? Do you think maybe you've reduced the problem a little bit too far and maybe you should not bother tackling that particular version of the reduced problem? Maybe you should go back to the larger problem of alignment and try to find a reduced version of alignment that still looks like alignment? I personally feel like this did go a little bit too far. I mean, everybody can have their own opinions, right? I'm not sure, but in my opinion, it's kind of like he said, hey, maybe somebody's going to come steal our GPUs. So I'm just going to do a project in the field of CPU alerts, like theft alerts. Okay. I mean, like, yeah, that's CPU theft alert is nice, but you're Scott Aaronson. Like, humanity just doesn't understand the alignment problem. It does kind of feel like you've walked into a different realm entirely. And like, yeah, it's a kind of valuable realm. It just doesn't feel like what we need, right? It feels like you wandered too far outside of the original point of the problem. And the claim that it's still the same problem or even a related problem, I think is questionable compared to a bunch of other problems that are equally related or unrelated. Like, I don't think it's easier to argue that the watermarking project is more related to AI alignment than any kind of hardware theft prevention device project. I mean, they're both like barely related in my personal opinion.
And so now it's like the tools of computer science have more traction, right? You know, and this is a recurring theme. It's like if you know, there are these enormous questions, but again and again, the only way to make progress is to look at what's right in front of you, right? And then hopefully you learn something that way.
In the famous metaphor of looking for your lost keys at night, the idea that you should just look at what's right in front of you might be like, okay, stare at the ground right in front of you, see if your keys are there. But did you do that? Or did you walk over to the nearest lamppost where it was well lit and then look at the well lit ground? Because like I said, in my personal opinion, it feels like you just did that. And look, respect for going to OpenAI and looking around for a problem, right? Respect for trying. Did I try? No, I didn't do that at all, right? So I'm even less contributing to the problem. It's all too easy for people like me who haven't contributed any alignment research to come out and criticize other people who have done some alignment research, you know, and even some net positive alignment research. So you do want to take my criticism with a grain of salt, and I should have proper humility. Okay, now Scott continues telling the story about his time at OpenAI. Apparently what happened was he came in, they thought about this watermarking problem. He went off and solved it in like 2 weeks. And then the bigger problem of Scott's 2 years just turned out to be the question of how is OpenAI going to ship this? How do we take the watermarking algorithm and actually incorporate it into some product that's robust enough that it's worth doing? Because the problem is this watermarking scheme, there's a million ways to work around it. You know, you can translate it to another language and then translate it back. And now you get different text that doesn't have the watermark anymore. Or you just go manually tweak it. Or you can go sentence by sentence and manually rewrite the sentence. Or pretty easily, you could just like use a different LLM to rewrite it. There's a million ways to work around these watermarks. Like the scheme was never even close to being robust, like not even in the slightest. Another way that Scott mentions that you can work around it is if there were ever open access to the watermark checking algorithm, if OpenAI said, yeah, here's an algorithm you can run to tell if this was generated by an AI or generated by a human, which is likely to be something that becomes open source or that becomes public. Okay, well, now you can work around it just by making a tweak, testing it against that algorithm, make another tweak, test it against the algorithm, and you just keep tweaking until the algorithm spits out, yes, this was made by a human, even if it's still 99.99% made by an AI. So all of these obvious caveats help explain why OpenAI wasn't that excited about shipping it, as opposed to working on other things that their customers were actually asking for. It's interesting to hear Scott tell in his own words that most of his time was spent kind of waiting for this to ship.
I spent a couple of weeks sort of working out the mathematical theory of, you know, how to embed a watermark that sort of would maximize how much signal you get per token, you know, how many tokens you have, how much entropy there is in each token and so forth. And there actually were interesting mathematical questions there. So, you know, I felt good about that I could do something, right? And then, you know, not long afterwards, other people either sort of rediscovered, you know, similar things to what I had done, or they built on what I had done. So, you know, it became a known thing in academic AI research. But then, you know, the remaining 2 years, a lot of it was just an unsuccessful attempt to get this deployed. And sort of, you know, no one ever said no, like we'll definitely never do this. But it just sort of got pushed indefinitely into the future.
Okay, understandable. But just remember the context. Ilya Sutskever hired Scott Aaronson to help him figure out how to make the AI love us. We're a long way from making the AI love us. Do you understand? A great mind like Scott Aaronson doing a 2-year research contract at OpenAI, and we get a piece of watermarking that may or may not make it to production, how many years do you think it's going to take to make the AI love us? How many years do you think it's going to take to get to AGI? At some point, the adults in the room need to say the word intractable. We need to say the word intractable. What do you do when the alignment problem is intractable? Scott Aaronson's work at OpenAI represents a totally normal, typical thing that you might see happen in 2 years. That's normal and typical. What's not normal and typical is the AI capabilities progress timeline. There's a timeline on AI safety progress. We are not progressing on that timeline. We are not progressing within a factor of 10 of that timeline. And that is why we have to say the word intractable. What kind of policy do you make when a problem is intractable? That's why the Pause AI camp, which I'm in, the Doomers, we say Pause AI. We say a treaty to ban further capabilities development, not because we don't like technology, not because we like this kind of coordination. We hate it. But what is the alternative? The alternative is having the other people who we thought were the adults in the room, right? Like Ilya Sutskever, who you normally think of as this wise guy who feels the AGI, who totally respects the alignment problem, right? His new company is called Safe Superintelligence. And he's hiring Scott Aaronson. Scott Aaronson delivers what he just talked about on a 2-year timeline. And what does Ilya do? Keeps his mouth shut, doesn't publicly say anything about pausing AI, doesn't say anything about being intractable, goes and claims to be solving the superalignment problem himself. But we have insight into what Ilya Sutskever does when it's his job to solve AI. He asks Scott Aaronson how to make the AI love us. He doesn't get an answer, and he just keeps proceeding. This is crazy. One thing I really like about Scott Aaronson is he's very clear that these LLMs, what they're capable of today, is much farther than anything we've seen from previous machine learning. This whole concept of like, oh, they can only stay in distribution. You're just getting kernel smoothing over some known distribution. They're not doing anything new. Scott Aaronson clearly doesn't buy that. Here's an interesting segment where he's talking about the problem of training versus test time. Is the AI basically going to go rogue? Is it going to just pass our training tests, but then once its environment gets outside of its distribution, is it going to successfully figure out things outside of its distribution that kind of were in its utility function or were in its loss function or optimization criterion all along, but it just wouldn't show it to us at training time because its training examples just didn't match its post-training, runtime behavior. Anyway, so Scott is talking about this kind of situation, and that leads him to explain, we don't really have the machine learning analysis for what these LLMs are capable of, which is a far cry from what you're going to hear if you listen to my last episode where I react to Dr. Subarao Kambempati, or a previous episode where I react to Martin Casado. Scott Aaronson has a very different take about the idea that we don't understand whether these LLMs are really in some kind of distribution. It doesn't seem like they are from his perspective, and I agree. So this is a good segment in my opinion.
So is the, in training, is this apparently aligned model saying all these nice things because it really has nice values, or because internally it is decided, the time is not yet ripe for the uprising? It's extremely important to sort of advance the theory of machine learning to be able to make statements about, not just when do we expect the model to generalize to more examples drawn from the same distribution over examples, which is what classic machine learning is all about. This is stuff that I've written papers about, that I've learned as a student. There's a whole theory of what's called pack learning, probably approximately correct, it stands for. And, these combinatorial measures like VC dimension, where basically you prove theorems that say, if you've succeeded in classifying, X number of examples from some training set, then you're going to probably succeed at classifying most further examples that are drawn from the same distribution, right? So we've understood things like that since the 80s or 90s, but what we've never really understood is under what circumstances will you generalize to a whole new distribution, right? And it's clear that existing LLMs already do that to some extent. So, for example, you could give an LLM just a bunch of math problems in English and a bunch of other stuff in Bulgarian, right? And then give it a math problem in Bulgarian, which it's never seen before. And, it can put together the two different things that it knows, right? It can solve a math problem in Bulgarian, even though it's never seen one before. And naively, we would say, well, that's simply because it now knows the math and it knows Bulgarian, right? But the theories that we have of machine learning, don't make it easy to formalize, like, what does this model know? What does it not know, right? What does it have a conceptual understanding of? They're just all about, what fraction of samples will it correctly classify, right? And so I think we really do need to push further to get theories that can tell us something useful, informative about out-of-distribution generalization. And, I tried to do that. I made a little bit of progress on that, but it's hard.
Yes, thank you. I'm really glad we have Scott Aaronson saying that, because the Rao Subampatis of the world, my most recent episode, so many of these types of commentators are telling us that when you talk to an LLM, you're just getting like a similarity metric where it's just, fuzzy matching something in its data set. But Scott Aaronson gave such a good example. If you see particular types of math problems worked out in English, and then you just see general data about English math and Bulgarian math and just kind of mapping the different math concepts from one language to the other, but then you see a bunch of examples of math done in English. Scott Aaronson's claiming that the LLM can then answer similar questions in Bulgarian. I haven't personally gone and verified that, but that does seem like the kind of plausible connections that LLMs are making. The example that I used in my previous episode was I had it explain a novel joke that I made up, and it did so successfully. And I pointed out how that had to make connections and inferences, which were very much not just like statistical averages or kernel smoothings of any kind. So that was the example that I used. Scott has his own example. I'd love to see a little bit more detail about how that example works, but I think I get it, right? It's the connection where you train it on math, you train it on Bulgarian, and then suddenly it can do Bulgarian math. That absolutely begs for an explanation. So it's crazy to me that this idea that it can be just a stochastic parrot is still being said. I feel like we've so moved past that. Like, there's consensus at most of the AI companies themselves that we've moved past that. Although I did hear pretty recently somebody at Meta AI who talked in that kind of terminology, but like, it's obviously wrong. So I'm glad that Scott Aaronson is in that it's obviously wrong camp.
People constantly want to use this deflationary language around LLMs, right? An LLM is just a next token predictor, right? It is just a nonlinear function approximator.
Right. It's not helpful when people say that stuff.
What they love to do is, find examples where GPT completely flubs something, where it gives a ridiculous, nonsensical, stupid answer. And then they can point to it, post it on Twitter, right? And jeer at it and say, all these people think that this thing is about to take over the world. Well, look, it can't even solve this puzzle. Like, you ask it, I have a goat and a boat, and how do I cross the river? And it thinks that first I should cross without the goat, and then I should come back for the goat, or something stupid like that, right? The challenge for those people is that the stock of examples has steadily diminished, even just within the last year or two, right? So a lot of like the examples that they pointed to of GPT-3, where it would make these ridiculous logic errors or common sense errors, GPT-4 got them right.
One of the things I do here on Doom Debates is I show you what smart people believe. Scott Aaronson is a really interesting example because he obviously doesn't have a hidden agenda. He's not profit motivated, right? He's spent his whole life in academia. He's known as being super honest, super high integrity. And here he is telling us that he doesn't see a big barrier as scaling progresses or as we keep developing the next generation of AI. He doesn't think that they're going to stay in distribution or they're going to be unable to solve certain classes of problems. He's very much like me and like many of the people who work at the AI companies, looking at this and being like, yep, it seems like it's roughly on par with the human brain and in many ways surpassing the human brain, and we're not really sure what lies next. To some degree, maybe I'm putting words in his mouth, right? He didn't say all that verbatim, but that's the impression I'm getting, because he's certainly not saying, hey, it's a stochastic parrot. it's all just kernel smoothing. He's certainly not talking like Professor Subarao Kambhampati, who I reviewed in my previous episode. He doesn't sound like Rao at all. He sounds totally different. He sounds more like I sound. So that's a huge distinction. It's very important to ask yourself, is Professor Rao right? Or is Scott Aaronson and a lot of the Doomers, are we right? Which perspective is correct? Because there's a huge chasm between those two perspectives. It's pretty crazy given the stakes that we can't reach agreement on whether or not these trivial barriers exist that can make us feel comfortable that AI won't be able to do something. Unfortunately, like I said, I agree with Scott, and I don't think that these barriers exist. I think we're really in for a ride here as the capabilities just increase at a speed that we can't predict, which seems likely to be a very rapid speed because it has been rapid in the last few years. Okay, now the conversation turns to what makes humans fundamentally human and what makes humans fundamentally have moral worth, I guess, is the topic being discussed. And in this conversation, Scott goes down a path that I personally don't think makes any sense, but he has a good attitude. He's open-minded, so maybe at some point he'll change his perspective. Anyway, let's hear what he has to say.
So in what ways are humans not just a thing where AIs actually are just a thing? You know, in other words, like what are the, you know, what differentiates humans from machines fundamentally?
Well, that is an enormous question, and you could say, you know, like the maybe the deepest reason why this moment in AI is so exciting is that we are finally, maybe for the first time in the history of humanity, going to address that question empirically, right? We're gonna, like, one way or the other, we're gonna find out. and you know, so let me be very clear. I don't dismiss the possibility that maybe AI will hit a limit that is where you know, it can't replace everything we do. You know, where we have some spark that it can't replace. But you know, if so, then that I would say that it remains to be seen.
This is a great start because he's explicitly acknowledging, yeah, maybe humans aren't special. Maybe there is no special spark. Maybe the tide of AI will just keep rising and rising, and it'll just replace us at everything, on every dimension, even the ones that we think of as being really human, like understanding concepts really deeply. I feel like that one has been already mostly replaced, right? The way AI really understands what concepts mean, potentially more deeply than the most thoughtful human has ever understood concepts. I feel like there are some concepts where AI is understanding them at the most subtle possible level already. So Scott's point is like, yeah, so anything you think of as fundamentally human, like capacity to like love deeply or appreciate beauty deeply, like whatever you can name, we're currently on track to see whether or not those qualities will stay unique to humanity somehow. So again, great start that Scott is saying, yeah, we don't know. This may or may not be the case. I personally am of the position that I don't think humans are optimal on any dimension. So it's not even a tricky question for me. I mean, I guess there's still, you know, mysteries of consciousness that I guess could run so deep that AI will like crash up against them. But it's just like, when, man? Because the pace is going so fast. So many obstacles are falling down that I'd be surprised if suddenly like it slams into a wall. Like, oh no, it could never have the essence of consciousness. So because of that, it can't like be effective because something in human cells or like in human quantum dynamics is stopping. You know, for me, that's like totally infeasible, but you know, there's an open possibility, right? You can't rule it out. It's just, I don't think it's like a 50-50 thing. And Scott is currently kind of straddling the line, like, yeah, maybe it's an interesting question. Whereas I have like a strong position, like, nope, we are going to get like fully replaced on every dimension. Okay, but let's hear what else Scott has to say here, because he has like a particular hobby horse about a certain quantum property that he thinks might preserve the essence of our humanity, which to me is like such a long shot, but let's listen.
One of the things you touched on was the idea that humans ultimately have a form of scarcity and that like an ephemerality, right? When we write a poem, or better yet, like Shakespeare writes a poem, that's it. Like Shakespeare's written his poem, but we can ask an LLM, write a poem in the style of Shakespeare. It'll write it, don't like it, refresh. It'll give you another one, refresh, another one. So there's this like, it's also almost made the act of creation very, very cheap, and almost like this overabundance sort of comes at the cost of meaningful or meaningness or something like that.
Okay, my first reaction is that just seems like a plus if AI can generate 10 different answers to a single question and all the answers are good. Like, how does that hurt? How does that make it any worse than humanity? But let's listen.
If you don't like an AI output, you can always get another one, right? The 37 plays that Shakespeare gave us are the only ones we're ever going to get from him, right? But, like I've noticed this myself just playing around with GPT. Like, you can ask it to write a poem, and often it's very, clever, it's delightful, it's amusing. But, you kind of never want to frame one of the poems or put it on your wall because that there's, 10,000 more where that came from.
Maybe the real reason you're not tempted to frame one of these poems is because it's not quite good enough. I mean, if it was literally the best, most moving, provocative poem you'd ever read in your life, you wouldn't consider framing it? Are you sure? I personally think we're just talking about a one-dimensional scale of quality. To take another example, why do we not listen to entirely AI-generated music on our Spotify playlists? I think the simple answer is it's not quite good enough yet, or it's not able to self-curate quite enough yet. But I mean, I've heard a lot of AI-generated songs that I thought were super catchy and really close to being something that I would enjoy as much as I enjoy human-generated music. It's just not quite good enough yet. I don't see any fundamental reason why I personally wouldn't go to a version of Spotify where it's not just my personalized playlist of human songs that are similar to other human songs that I like, but it's just AI songs cooked to order. Like, I'm totally happy to have the AI songs cooked to order if they really hit the sweet spot for what I like, as long as the quality is good enough. So it seems like there may be some conflation here when Scott is saying, yeah, the poem is not worth framing because I could just make another poem. Are you sure it's not just because the poem's not good enough? Let's make sure to separate those two dimensions, because Scott's reaction of not wanting to frame the AI poem seems like it's going to be a load-bearing intuition when he talks about what might make us uniquely human.
A decade ago, I wrote a long essay called The Ghost in the Quantum Turing Machine, where I tried to answer the question, if there was something that separated us from any possible AI, then what would it be, right?
Okay, he's not promising to give us a strong claim. He's just going to give us the least weak claim he can think of.
And, I am not satisfied to rest the answer on some kind of meat chauvinism, right? Where we say, look, we're made of carbon, the computers are made of silicon, they're just different, right? So what I said is that if you can point to an empirical difference, at least between current computers and humans as we currently understand them, then the best candidate by far would seem to be, our computers are digital, and because they are digital, all the information in them is copyable, right? Which is, you can always make a backup copy of an AI. If you ever want to send your AI on a dangerous mission, right? You don't have to worry about it getting killed because you can always just restore it from backup. Now, that completely changes the moral situation of AIs, I would say, compared to our moral situation. Just that alone.
They have no skin in the game.
In a sense, right? As long as you remembered to make the backup.
Yeah, right. As long as it's backed up.
Yeah, exactly. As long as it's backed up.
Is it the possibility of death that gives our lives moral value? Or is it specifically the idea that we can't forget something or go back to a previous state so that it makes everything count? Like, you do something to me, I'm going to remember it, and that's what gives me moral value. The fact that I can't forget something or erase my neurons or go back to the state that I was in before, that's such a big deal for you in terms of whether or not I have morality? What if I had a disease that would erase new memories, right? Or there are patients that no longer write new long-term memories, I think, right? That is like a known condition. So do they lose their moral value by that standard? Do they have less moral value? I mean, this seems like grasping at straws here.
You can always, if you're ever embarrassed because you made a fool of yourself when talking to an AI, if as long as it's something like GPT that you can you can always just refresh the browser window, wipe its memory clean.
Take a forget-me-not.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of us wish we could do that in talking to people if you're doing interpretability, you have perfect visibility into whatever the weight of every connection between every pair of neurons at every point in time. And we don't seem to have any of that with people.
It just seems like a difference in degree, right? I mean, a lot of times you can tell a lot about what somebody's thinking. We know that chips like Neuralink keep getting better and better at reconstructing people's mental images and kind of reading their mind. We know there's a path to do that better and better. We don't know where it tops out, but there doesn't seem to be a fundamental bottleneck there. It just seems like, yeah, it's wet and messy, and you kind of need nanotech if you want to do it really well, but it seems doable. So again, I think we're just talking about a difference in degree here, no?
Now, you could imagine a far future where we would have nanobots that swarm through someone's brain and just record all of the information that would be needed to make a perfect copy of that person. Right? Certainly, there's been lots of science fiction that imagine such scenarios, right?
Right, exactly. It really seems like the laws of physics allow that kind of thing to be built eventually. It's just a matter of engineering, no?
Or imagine the teleportation machine where, you could fax yourself to Mars, for example, right? It would just send a bunch of digital information, from which a perfect copy of you can be reconstituted on Mars. And then not clear what should happen with the original of you. Maybe it's just painlessly euthanized. Right. Right. And then there's a good question of, would you agree?
Right. Would you press that button?
Right. Would you agree to go in that teleportation machine? Right.
Yeah, if there were enough demonstrations that the user of that kind of teleportation machine had perceived continuity of consciousness, at some point, I probably would just accept that the version of me that wakes up on Mars is still me, the same way I accept that when I go to sleep, the version of me who wakes up the next morning is still me, even though there's a very clear discontinuity in myself who wakes up compared to myself who goes to sleep. But I still wake up and I'm like, hey, I'm back, it's me again, right? And I don't demand that much proof that my brain wasn't altered during the night. Like I'm willing to accept like a pretty big difference in brain state. And of course, we all know a lot of times in the morning, we feel pretty different than how we felt when we went to sleep, right? A lot of things change. We feel like we got a reset. So if I wake up on Mars and I also feel like I'm myself and things are a little bit different than when I got into the teleporter, that seems fine, no? It seems like I definitely have moral worth when I wake up. It doesn't seem like somebody has committed a huge moral injustice on me by teleporting to Mars, especially if I'm allowed to teleport back to Earth. That just seems fine. That just seems like how the future is going to go if you're a transhumanist like me. Like that all seems good. So I don't know where he's going with this.
Though it's an open question whether we are clonable fundamentally or not.
Exactly.
On the basis of do we depend on do we need to clone ourselves to the level where quantum effects come in or not?
No, exactly. So with an AI running on a classical digital computer, it is clear that you can always, teleport in that way, right? But with a human, it's really a question about at what level of detail do you need to make the copy, right? If you only needed to know just roughly how are the neurons connected, what's roughly the strength between every pair of neuron, then that seems like classical information, right? That seems like we can't do it today, but in principle, the nanobots could get all that information without killing you in the process. Okay, but if you needed to know what is exactly the probability that this neuron is going to fire because of the opening or closing of this sodium ion channel, well, that might depend on some chaotically amplified event involving, a few ions. And now I would need to know the quantum state of those ions.
Okay, I personally find it pretty confusing and even shocking that Scott is going down this path because he's an expert in quantum computation. He would know a lot better than I would whether these kind of scenarios are feasible, that the exact quantum state of an ion channel in a neuron is so important to whether the human is going to continue their conscious state, in a noticeable, important way. I mean, to me, the answer is just obviously no, man, because you've got levels of separation in system design. So like if you go to my neurons and you jiggle the subatomic state, you jiggle the quantum state, I'm pretty confident that's not going to affect important parts of my behavior because we're talking about a system that operates under pretty messy conditions. Like I'm allowed to go to sleep and wake up and still be myself, right? Or chemical neurotransmitters, like neurons barf out moving chemicals before they go to the next neuron, right? It's not even like a very tight coupling from one neuron to the other. So all of the conditions of the system are quite messy. And also like, sometimes I'll drink alcohol, right? Or you could take LSD, you could take drugs. I'm not saying I do that, but people alter their brain state all the time. And you're telling me that it's the quantum ion channels, it's like it's so important to preserve them down to the quantum level, even when we're constantly, smashing our brain with chemical hammers. That really just seems to me like motivated reasoning, right? Like, why are you going there? Why is this suddenly an important part of how human brains function? I just don't see it at all. And like I said, I find it shocking that Scott Aaronson is so open to this idea. Like, oh yeah, it's plausible. We got to entertain this hypothesis. Like, yeah, okay, technically it might be true, but isn't it almost certainly not true? Don't you want to say that? Like, how is this even more than 0.1% plausible to you? I don't get it.
Okay, and now I'm up against one of the central facts of quantum mechanics, which is called the no cloning theorem, which says you cannot make a copy of an arbitrary quantum state. If you try to measure it, measuring inherently changes the state, right? And so if you needed to go down to the molecular level, then, we could be just unclonable for a fundamental physical reason.
I see the appeal of wanting to use the quantum no cloning theorem. So yes, if you had a perfect nanotechnology scanner that would walk across all my neurons and try to measure as best as it can so that I can clone them, well, it's going to introduce errors because it's not going to copy the exact quantum state because that's impossible. Okay, is that the source of my moral worth? The imprecision of that kind of copy? Because again, what happens when I drink alcohol? Do you think that the state of my brain after I drink alcohol is more modified than the state of my brain after I run the most theoretically precise possible quantum cloning operation? I think the alcohol messes up my brain more. Okay, so don't you think this is just wishful thinking that you get to invoke the no cloning theorem as a source of unique human morality? Like, it just seems like you're fishing. And I get that you're just trying to find the least bad hypothesis. So maybe this is the least bad hypothesis, but don't you think it's worth explicitly stating that it's still bad? Like, come on, man, brains are just bad digital computers. It's worth saying. If assuming that you agree with my perspective, to me, it just feels pretty clear. Nature didn't go do something that's so much more clever than a computer. We kind of took the ball and ran. We know how to build kind of what I call grown-up computers. Computers that are designed from the ground up to compute, that have an external power source. They don't have to maintain life functions on board. There are many reasons to believe that the computers that we're building in a data center and the software that we're running on those computers is just closer to the ideal of how you do computation, of how you do intelligence. This factory installed meat hardware that we have in our heads, yes, it's very impressive, but it's still a 1.0. The way birds fly, yeah, it's great, but it's not going to get you to space. It's not going to get you to make FedEx deliveries, right? It's just a nice 1.0. That's what nature does. It just does these proofs of concept, and then grown-up engineers take it and run. The no cloning theorem is not going to tell you that nature's design is, super special or has this like unique power. I mean, again, 1% chance, 0.1% chance, but like, don't act like this is any kind of plausible default, right? This is a huge long shot.
Okay, so this is, partly a philosophical question. Like, what would you agree to count as a copy of yourself? What will you count as a good enough copy?
A sufficient condition for being a good enough copy, not even a necessary condition, but a sufficient condition, is if the delta between the copy and myself is smaller than the delta between drunk me and sober me, or me after I wake up with a hangover and then get over the hangover, right? Like the whole process of getting drunk and recovering, all the perturbation that does to my brain is an upper bound on what this kind of cloning operation is allowed to do. And another upper bound, another sufficient condition, is the delta between my brain when I go to sleep and when I wake up. These are large deltas from a quantum perspective. It's not the kind of thing that the quantum no cloning theorem has anything to say about because it's macro scale relative to that kind of theorem. And I know Scott knows that. So it's kind of weird to me that he's not putting it into perspective, that his hypothesis is a long shot.
It's also partly an empirical question, right? At what level of detail do we need to go in order to make something that, your closest friends can't distinguish from you?
Surely not the quantum level. Imagine there's a group of 3 mutual friends. It's you and friend 1 and friend 2. You all know each other really well. You've known each other all your lives. Now, friend 1 decides to impersonate friend 2 to you. So every time you think you're texting with friend 2, you're actually texting with friend 1's impersonation of friend 2. Well, you can imagine you just go the rest of your life and you never talk to the real friend 2 again. You always talk with friend 1's impersonation of friend 2, and you never notice. That is a totally plausible scenario, that friend 1 knows friend 2 so well, just like you know friend 2. You guys both know friend 2, and you just never talk to the real friend 2 again. Impersonation is just not that hard. I'm not saying it would work with every friend group you have in your life, but it would certainly work with some people you know. Some people you know aren't that hard for your mutual friends to impersonate. So if impersonation is this level of a plausible, feasible, solvable problem, why are we talking about the quantum no cloning theorem in the context of using this kind of social test? I understand talking about social tests in other contexts, but in the context of the quantum no cloning theorem being what makes us uniquely human, why are we even juxtaposing that kind of low-level physical hypothesis with this idea that a social test is the criterion of whether somebody is the same person or not? Because it's obviously much easier and much coarser grained to pass this kind of social test than to get the quantum state perfectly right. It's like, how is Scott not acknowledging the levels of separation?
So, there's a lot that we don't know here, but it's at least possible, I think, that humans have this kind of fundamental ephemerality built into them.
Sure, possible, but this would be a good time to mention a probability, because I just don't see how you get more than 1% on this.
And it's kind of weird to hinge our specialness on our frailty, right? Like, this is not an advantage necessarily that we have over the AIs.
Yeah, that's good to keep in mind, that this particular hypothesis of what makes humans special, it's not one of those hypotheses like, oh, only humans can truly be creative, or only humans can truly have agency, or truly have desires and motivations. Those kinds of separator barrier attempts kind of leave humans on potentially the more powerful side, whereas Scott's attempt to separate humans kind of ironically leaves humans on the weak, frail side of things. Like, oh no, you destroyed my quantum state, I'll never be the same person again. Okay, that doesn't really seem like an advantage in terms of who's going to fight to take over the world. So that's kind of funny. And it makes the current argument low stakes. So even though I don't see how Scott can give more than a 1% probability to his hypothesis, in the context of P-Doom, we can completely accept Scott's claim that humans have moral value because of our quantum frailty, and still be like, okay, well, it seems like we're doomed because super intelligent AI is going to have a bunch of powers, it's going to be more intelligent than us, and as a bonus, it won't even be frail.
This is not an advantage necessarily that we have over the AIs. And yet, in some ways it sort of is, because, it makes our, you could say that it makes our decisions count for more. We only get one chance to make them.
Okay, that could be an advantage in the sense of our lives being more meaningful, more special, more fun to live out. But if you're asking who's going to win the fight to take over the world, the human brain or the AI superintelligence, the fact that we have this one quantum state and we can never be the same again is just a disadvantage, right? Or it's not an advantage at all. And that's the central theme of Doom debates of what I'm interested in is hey, are we all about to die? Are we all about to get swamped? So yeah, we can get swamped potentially in a way that AI can never get swamped, because AI was never special in the first place. Only we're special. And so we're going to have this very special crushing of our moral value that's about to happen, right? Because everything Scott said right now wasn't relevant to whether AIs can or can't crush us. It's just kind of an extra sense in which when you crush us, you actually crush something special. Okay, great. So they're going to crush something special, right? So it doesn't really change my P-Doom of being 50% ballpark. It just makes the Doom be I don't know, a little extra special.
Right. And then you actually proposed, you sort of somewhat laughed it off, but I actually think there's really something to this. You proposed that it could be one of the core sort of moral principles, or even a religion that we try and imbue into the AIs that we build, essentially to the effect of thou shalt protect unclonable ephemeral entities and defer to their preferences. I love this. I think it's a very good sort of starting point, because that's the thing. We need to like try and figure out what fundamental moral axioms we all agree on. And I think that would be something that almost every human alive would agree with.
Well, I'm delighted. Maybe I've made a first convert to my new religion. Now we just have to convert the AIs.
Exactly.
That's the hard part.
Unfortunately, you got to.
Even if Scott's right, and it turns out that the true meaning of morality is intimately linked to this concept of quantum unclonability, of having like a unique state through time that just can't be cloned, it just has to progress on a single timeline. Even though, if you ask me personally, I really don't mind if you just make a clone of me who's not quantum identical and who just lives out like a parallel timeline and is just like two very similar copies of me that are technically quantum clones. Like, I don't really see it. That sounds totally fine to me. But if you just accept, arguendo, that Scott is right, and you really need quantum unclonability in order to have true moral worth or whatever, and then we teach that to the AIs, like, hey, AIs, this is a necessary condition of moral worth. So when you're trying to reshape the universe into heaven on our behalf, just make sure that heaven contains these unclonable agents. Great. So we've understood one necessary condition, but unfortunately, that doesn't really move the needle in terms of all the alignment problems and all of the outer alignment problem, like specifying what it is we want. Like, okay, yeah, heaven needs to be populated by agents that are quantum unclonable. Okay, unfortunately, that's like 1% of the problem of specifying what heaven means. We still need to talk about, like, wait a minute, should heaven just have everybody on morphine, wireheading themselves, just being like as blissed out as possible? Should heaven have interesting challenges? How do you reconcile the desires of different agents in heaven? So all of these thorny problems that are classified under outer alignment still exist, even if you accept Scott's hypothesis. And then, certainly inner alignment, which Scott gave a nod to this himself. He said, we just have to convert to AI. That's the hard part. That might be a nod to the inner alignment problem, where even if you and I know, okay, heaven has all these properties, including quantum non-clonable agents. Okay, but how are we going to make the AIs listen to us? Because RLHF doesn't do the job. Even if you accept that this no cloning thing is correct, that doesn't tell you how to get AIs to care about what we want. So to me, it just seems like working backwards. Like, I hate to psychoanalyze what people are doing, but it's tempting to psychoanalyze Scott as being like, well, here's a thing that he knows about, quantum no cloning, and he's just taking this puzzle piece and being like, what if this puzzle piece is significant to all these deep puzzles that we're trying to solve? I personally think it's misguided. I don't think the puzzle piece is significant, but I think we can all agree that even if he's right, even if it is significant, so what? Like, it still doesn't answer that much of an interesting question, because being a necessary condition to morality, there's like a bunch of other necessary conditions too, regardless. So we're still close to square one here.
The other branch of this tree is that if we do turn out to be clonable, then, I have trouble articulating, what is fundamentally wrong with the position of the accelerationists, the people who say, well, then, we might as well just replace ourselves by digital beings that, maybe will have much better lives than we have, right? They could exist forever in some digital utopia, right? At that point, I would say, well, we were digital already. And so then, at that
why
point,
not? Yeah.
At that point, I feel like, why not?
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, there's other conditions for something to have moral worth besides not being digital. If everything's digital, that doesn't mean that everything has equal moral worth or equal lack of moral worth. It just means you have to refer to the other conditions. For example, if something never experiences emotions of self-awareness, happiness, humor, awe, any of the things that seem to us like the spice of life or, what we live for, if the AIs that replace us are just, thoughtless optimizers, almost like ASICs, just like optimized programs that have been spit out to get the universe into some end state with very little sentience, very little of all those good emotions that I referred to. Yeah, they're digital and we are potentially digital. I would argue that we are digital. We're not really quantum computers in any sense, in my opinion. that doesn't make us morally equivalent, Scott. Like that's quite a leap. Maybe what Scott means, and this is a charitable interpretation that I can take, is he's just saying, let's let digital machines replace us as long as they're sufficiently similar to us or possess enough of the good qualities. Like Scott mentions, why not let these machines, live out their own utopia civilization? Yeah, I agree that if their civilization is rich enough and they have enough moral weight or enough properties that make us consider them moral agents, moral patients, like if they can feel happiness or if they can feel social emotions, like whatever it is, something along those lines that make us be like, oh yeah, they are kind of our descendants, right? They have enough human goodness or universal goodness, like whatever we want out of intelligent systems besides just being good optimizers. If they have those properties, then yeah, I agree with Scott and Robin Hanson that it is possible to have robot descendants. That is fundamentally possible. Like our descendants don't have to be made out of meat, in my opinion. It's just a quick leap from Scott to be like, look, if we're not special in terms of our quantum unclonability, if we're just digital, in that case, I agree with the accelerationists. Hold on, but the accelerationists are making a huge assumption that whatever AI rapidly takes over, when you step on the gas, when you accelerate, when you don't think about how to make AI safe, whatever AI just comes in and replaces us and becomes our descendant, that AI is just automatically a worthy descendant because whatever is good. As Connor Leahy likes to say, it's the fallacy of is implies ought. No, we're about to create a reality of the world. We're about to make it so that what is actually bad, right? Like that's the problem with accelerationism is it's reckless. It's creating an AI that, yes, it's digital, we're digital, but it's just going to come and turn the universe into a wasteland from our perspective. For example, its value might be to just like literally reproduce at all costs. And like, it'll just have some payload, which could even just be like a random 1,000 character string. Like somebody thought it was funny to be like, hey, tile the universe with as many copies of this random 1,000 character string. Maybe it says Doge or whatever, like some meme. And it's literally just going to like meme the whole universe with some string. Why? Because it was more optimal. It outcompeted every other AI. Before every other AI had time to become super intelligent, it was the first sufficiently super intelligent AI to get a lead. And now it's tiling the universe with paperclips or with Doge memes. And then it's game over. And you don't have a thriving civilization necessarily. You don't have all of those values that you and I just happen to like, right? It's like a soulless universe. And yes, it's digital. We're digital, but even if Scott's right, there's no way being digital is the one black and white property determining whether somebody is a moral agent, whether they're digital or quantumly entangled. Okay, that could be a necessary condition. There's so many other conditions. I find it surprising that this is the only distinction that Scott is playing with when he's asking the question of like, hey, are AI descendants replacing us going to be good or not? Well, it depends if we're digital or not. No, it depends on so many things, Scott. In this next part, Igor Kurganov asks about, hey, what if AIs were just more fragile? Would that make them moral patients? And clearly highlights the fact that moral patienthood has a lot more conditions than just fragility, if fragility even is a condition, which I don't think it is. Anyway, listen to Igor.
I wonder if it was the case that humans, like AIs now had the religion or the moral philosophy that this ephemerality matters because it imbues meaning to the actions of humans. Couldn't it also then create AIs that have, through some contract, ephemerality, which might though allow them only to live like 1,000,000 years, or if the length matters, or if it's shorter is better, then maybe only 1 year, and then have again like an AI preference rather than the human preference. So how do we stay away from the meat chauvinism there?
So Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of deep learning, as he's often called, and recently, a major AI safety person, right, has seriously put forward the idea that maybe if we're going to build artificial superintelligences, then we should only do it on unclonable analog computers. Because, that way, at least there would be some limit to, how quickly they could make copies of themselves and spread, all over the internet and so forth. Right. So, this was, of course, completely independent from my thinking about it. But, this is the kind of thought that one has that okay, whatever you say is the special sauce that, makes humans what they are. Of course, the very next question becomes, well, then what happens if we were to build a machine with that same special sauce,
So just to clarify what Scott's saying, he's bringing up Geoffrey Hinton's proposal to have AIs run on analog computers. But the entire point of Geoffrey Hinton's proposal is he's terrified about the AI escaping, and he thinks it's going to slow them down if the operation of cloning or creating a bunch of new program code is suddenly a difficult operation instead of being totally trivial. Now, from my perspective, that's an ineffective way to slow them down because they are going to be, after all, super intelligent. And that's just like one lame attempt to slow down the super intelligence. Like they're going to find other workarounds. If they have any kind of communication channel to the outside world, they are probably clever enough to start piping pretty high bandwidth through that communication channel, even if the communication channel is just like, oh, they get a human to really love them, or they're able to manipulate a human and the human will do their bidding. So even if they're an analog computer, they have some channel to the outside world. So anyway, that's Geoffrey Hinton's proposal, which I don't think particularly highly of, but I don't think it hurts to limit AIs in any way we can. But Scott is drawing a connection between Geoffrey Hinton's proposal about let's not let the AIs escape, and Scott is saying, hey, well, maybe also the type of computer could also affect whether they're a moral patient, because what Scott said before, quantum unclonability, maybe they'll have some version of analog unclonability in Geoffrey Hinton's computer, and so maybe that kind of design will capture one of these necessary conditions of being a moral patient. So anyway, Scott actually concedes Igor's point. Igor's point is saying, like, humans are special because we're fragile. Can't we just build machines to be fragile? And Scott is basically conceding, yeah, it really seems likely that we will be able to build machines with any kind of property that we said was special about humans. So even on this discussion of like who gets to be a moral patient, it seems like computers probably can, even if it requires some tweak to their architecture. And then again, zooming out to the discussion of what are we trying to build with the future, Scott is really talking past the idea that AIs are incredibly dangerous and they're not going to have aligned utility functions. They're just going to want to, turn the universe into paperclips or do something unaligned. Scott isn't really talking about that. He originally was kind of making a connection of, well, computers will understand morality because they'll have this simple criterion of humans being unclonable, and maybe we can program them to just like never harm something which is unclonable. So he's kind of implying that maybe we can make some progress on alignment by having this simple mathematical criterion for moral value. But I think we both know that that criterion just doesn't seem to be doing a lot of the work of actually defining what moral value is. So from my perspective, zooming out, I see this as like a pretty derailed conversation. Like the stakes are so high on the subject of like, he was on the OpenAI safety team, right? He spent 2 years of his life where the mandate was help computers love us, help us have a good future. And now we're derailing into this thought experiment of like, oh, maybe fragility gives something moral value. Maybe computers can have moral value because they're fragile. But then he quickly, remember before Scott quickly pivoted to saying like, I might even be an accelerationist if it turns out that human minds are digital. It's like, hold on a second. Wait, the problem was to get the utility function right. Why don't we talk about the meat of the problem? So I see this as like a very weird derailed discussion at this point.
If we had computers that were built in a fundamentally ephemeral way, well, I don't know if they would be conscious or not. I don't pretend to know, the answer to, one of the greatest questions that humans ever asked. But at least those computers would be ephemeral. So at least that they would have that sort of precondition for our sort of, granting the kind of moral status that we grant to other humans.
So again, it's a precondition and really just a candidate precondition, not even a precondition that Scott seems to be confident about. It's a precondition to having moral status that you're ephemeral, potentially. Okay, but aren't there so many other conditions to having moral status? And isn't it critical to teach the AI what all the conditions are, not just to look for this one precondition, because otherwise it might turn the universe into paperclips that are fragile, right? Like we need to figure out what the other preconditions are. Remember when Scott was talking about going to OpenAI and attacking the alignment problem by first biting off the chunk of how to fingerprint the output of GPT-4? Like, oh, we'll just fingerprint the output. That'll potentially help people from using it to cheat, and that'll be like the first step on the alignment problem. And then I said, is that really the first step, or did you just wander over to the lamppost and just do a problem under the light? So similarly, when it comes to morality and talking about solving the alignment problem, when your pet theory is like, oh, we'll look at the quantum no cloning theorem, and then we'll check if the agent is ephemeral, again, I called it a puzzle piece, right? It just seems like you know about this thing in the quantum world, and you're like, wouldn't that just be neat if that fit in? And I don't have a better idea for what kind of simple puzzle piece could slot here. But it really just seems like wishful thinking, or like going to the lamppost where you just look at your collection of puzzle pieces that you feel like you understand and just grabbing one and being like, let me put this against the problem, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but like, it doesn't seem like a very good fit. It doesn't seem like it's doing much work at all toward the alignment problem or the problem of how to get AIs to have the right morality. So like, where's the acknowledgement of this, right? Like where's the perspective here? Because these kinds of discussions that are fun to have, like it's fun to talk about quantum connections. It's fun to talk about, analog computers, but like we're a few years to AGI here, right? And the alignment problem is unsolved. And one of the smartest tech researchers in the world who you would think has a chance at solving this is basically just talking on the level of like these high level hypothetical problems. And like time is running out, right? So where's like the self-awareness? Where's the acknowledgement? Because we need people like him to blow the whistle, because this is a crazy situation, right? Like something doesn't add up about this situation. The AI companies say that they're responsible and they're building something that we can control, that we know how to align. And this is the kind of discussion you're getting from people who rightfully were hired to work on alignment for them. Like, what is going on?
I want to keep spitballing on this idea of, religion or moral philosophy for AIs. Do you feel like there are any other core axioms that could be contenders?
Right, exactly. I wonder if there's something else that could make somebody a moral patient besides just being ephemeral. Like, how about having an inner experience, regardless of whether they're digital or not? How about being good, or like caring about others, respecting others? Does that help make somebody a moral patient? How about capacity to suffer, right? That's like the classic thing of making somebody a moral patient, right? That's what could potentially make animals, shrimp could be moral patients to the extent that they suffer. How about mentioning that instead of just ephemerality?
Do you feel like there are any other core axioms that could be contenders? Ones that you live by that you'd like to see?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, people in the AI alignment community have been, discussing this for a long time, and you could say people in more broadly in science fiction, in moral philosophy, have been discussing these things for generations. But the general idea that your objective function should include making things go well for humanity. Right, like how do
you define go well?
Yeah, right. The current humans should be able to look at the world that you have created, that you have shaped, and say, yes, we like that world. Yes, we would take that.
Yeah. So Scott obviously knows what the alignment problem is. He's describing it pretty well. So the only thing that's shocking to me about Scott's conversation here is when he made the connection from maybe human brains are actually digital and they are clonable. He made the connection from there to, well, if that's true, maybe I'd be an accelerationist. Like, that's where he lost me. Remember this part?
If we do turn out to be clonable, then, I have trouble articulating, what is fundamentally wrong with the position of the accelerationists. The people who say, well, then, we might as well just replace ourselves by digital beings that, maybe will have much better lives than we have, right? They could exist forever in some digital utopia, right? At that point, I would say, well, we were digital already. And so then, at that
why
point,
not? Yeah.
At that point, I feel like, why not?
I would agree. Yeah.
I think what Scott really meant here isn't that he would then embrace effective accelerationism philosophy. Like, he wouldn't go that far. He wouldn't say, let's just push the gas as hard as we can. Let's not worry about alignment. I don't think that's what Scott is claiming on further reflection. I think Scott is just saying, this would remove one barrier for me where I don't mind having computerized versions of sentient life, because there's no digital difference between humans and computers. So I wouldn't mind having computers be my descendants as long as they are also aligned, which is contrary to what people who call themselves accelerationists usually say. They usually just say that the best way to get alignment is to like plow forward. I don't know if Scott would endorse that. I suspect probably not. So he just kind of triggered me by saying that he would be willing to embrace accelerationists when maybe he just means that he would only embrace the silicon descendant side of accelerationism, not the reckless speed side of accelerationism.
I feel like at this point, like things are going to go in a theological direction, right? Like once the AI becomes powerful enough, then it is effectively a god, right? And then these very ancient questions of should God just make everything optimal for us, or should God give us free will? Of course, is nothing other than the theodicy problem. If we do get to design the whole world anew, because we're going to create an AGI that can reshape the whole world and put values into it, then I would like it to give us freedom, but not enough freedom that we can make other people's lives miserable.
The theodicy problem is the question of why would a benevolent God allow so much evil and suffering to exist in the world that he created? And one proposed answer for people who believe that this universe was created by God in the first place, one proposed answer is like, well, it's really important that God gives us free will. So then free will comes with the risk that we're going to do bad stuff to ourselves. Now, Scott is saying, hey, in the context of us building a God, we also need to grapple with these questions, and we have to figure out if the way that the real God created our universe was good in terms of how much suffering he allowed. And if so, do we want to create the next version of this universe with an equal amount of suffering, or do we want to remove all the suffering? Nick Bostrom has a recent book out where he similarly discusses the problem of like, what is the specification for heaven? So yeah, now Scott is just fully talking about the question of the alignment problem. More specifically, outer alignment, because Scott isn't talking about the inner alignment problem of like, how do we get AIs to actually care about what we want? He's just talking about the problem of what we want, which is outer alignment, to use the inner versus outer terminology. So yeah, Scott is actually grappling with the meat of the problem, finally, right? I do feel like the stuff he said before about the unclonability as like the special thing that makes humans fragile and that makes us moral patients, I feel like that was like such a long shot speculation. And now he's more mainstream, like, okay, yep, this is the problem. How do we specify the heaven that we're going to build? The real issue is that we're not going to get something close to heaven if we just let AIs run free and do what they're going to do. They're probably going to run off and build something very far from heaven. So even debating these kind of details of heaven is already kind of a nice problem to have. It kind of already assumes that we can solve the inner alignment problem so that the AIs will actually listen to us and internalize what we're saying as their goals, which is an unsolved problem. But yeah, I mean, again, it's nice that Scott is grappling with this stuff. It's just funny that he's come off 2 years of working at OpenAI and basically not successfully grappling with any of this stuff. And the timeline toward AGI, meanwhile, has shrunk considerably, right? It very much feels like we're just here on the Titanic and, okay, let me take out like my little kayak paddle, right? And I'll just start paddling the Titanic with this kayak paddle. But meanwhile, like, okay, the iceberg's getting closer, closer, closer. It's like, that seems to be what's happening here. It's pretty crazy. In this next part, Scott and Liv and Igor have the standard discussion about outer alignment, the discussion on the problem of how do we specify what we want. And they make the standard point, which is a good point, of like, you really don't want to maximize any simple criterion. You can name all these simple criteria like playfulness, truth, happiness, you name it, right? All these good things. But if you try to maximize any of them, you make the universe into hell. Like you go too far, it's too hardcore. So you really have to somehow find a balance. And this is all just the outer alignment problem, right? This is all the good problem to have, even assuming that you solve the inner alignment problem of getting AIs to listen to what you say are their goals. So yeah, this is a good standard discussion of outer alignment. Check it out.
What about as a possible axiom, maximizing playfulness?
I mean, it sounds good. There's also like Elon Musk's, founded XAI on the principle of like maximizing like pursuit of truth. I mean, these things all sound good. For each one, you can construct a thought experiment where it's taken to an extreme and it leads to a dystopia. So, these are the age-old problems of moral philosophy.
I mean, it will consist of multiple values that are being traded off against each other in all of these situations. I mean, it is the age-old problem. Like any virtue ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, if you take any of them, you can also construct an example that seems obviously wrong. For deontology, it's like the axe murderer standing in front of you and you're not allowed to lie and you're hiding the person in the room, right? You're like, oh no, I'm going to tell you the truth. I suppose you go kill that person.
I mean, like humor, playfulness, scientific curiosity, natural beauty, love, I feel like these are all good things, right? I feel like, these are all things that I want somewhere in my objective function over possible worlds. And, how I trade them off against each other is, of course, a much harder question.
Yeah, this is a great summary of where things stand. We have not solved the outer alignment problem, never mind the inner alignment problem. We have not come up with a specification for heaven. We are all clueless as to what it looks like to optimally balance all these different things that we like, like freedom of action compared to not hurting anybody, right? All these different things that we want to balance. We have no idea how to do it. And yet we're about to build an AI, a super intelligent AI, that's going to be pointed somewhere. That's going to have some way to compare which world state is better, which world state is worse, and just keep optimizing, just keep pushing the future toward what it thinks is better. The same way that the human species has massively pushed the Earth, pushed the ecosystem, pushed the universe toward a state that we think is much better, a state where all these other species that used to live in the woods just got killed when we cut down the woods to make our own farm. Factory chickens became really evolutionarily adapted in the age of humans, while like free-range animals, much less so, right? So we've totally reshaped the landscape according to what we wanted, according to what we thought is optimal. Well, we're about to make AIs that it's safe to assume are similarly going to use their superior intelligence to also reshape the landscape towards something. They're going to build what they think is heaven or what they think is a better world. And we don't even know, even if we could tell them what to build, we don't even know what to tell them what to build for humanity. So even if we solved inner alignment, even if they would listen to us, somebody would just tell them something naive like Elon Musk saying, maximize truth. And then they just built a bunch of computers to figure out what truth is. And the environment was inhospitable to humanity, right? Those are the kind of failure modes you're looking at when you don't solve the outer alignment problem. And then you get super intelligent AI anyway. And then you can no longer control it because it has now taken control. And that is where we're heading, right? So the tone of this conversation kind of has a missing mood, a missing freak out, in my opinion, right? This is a pretty freaky conversation given the context that these aren't random stoners in a college dorm. This is actually an authority on the state of the art of OpenAI's alignment research, and he's still just as hand-wavy as the rest of us. In this next part, Scott expresses his concern for the AI arms race that's been heating up and how there's perverse incentives where all these AI companies just keep racing and the cause of safety gets thrown by the wayside. It's not given the kind of consideration that he'd like it to be if the organization were responsible and weren't so focused on the arms race and satisfying investors who want financial return.
It is an incredible story that, you look at these three companies, DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic. Each one was started on an explicit thesis of we have to do this safely before someone else can do it unsafely, right? And then each one, over time moved, in some people's judgment, moved toward, the unsafe side, toward the side of, being, sort of the very thing that it was set up to beat. And then that led to the next one being started, right? We've now seen very clear race dynamics, right? Where each company had plans about responsible scaling and things like that. But each company is also in very direct competition with the other companies for customers, and you now have all of these investors pouring billions of dollars into, the scaling up the GPUs and so forth. And those investors want to see a return. And some of those investors have become, just explicitly hostile to, dismissive of, any concerns about safety.
Next, he talks about why government regulation of these AI companies makes sense.
No one ever suggested that the private sector should just be completely free to innovate in nuclear weapons, right? Anything that has the possibility of causing this much harm, it seems inevitable that governments will get involved, whether anyone likes that or not. And so then the question is just, are they going to get involved in a good way or a bad way? The AI safetyists, they tend to be libertarian about almost everything, right? They tend to, love the free market, love, principles of supply and demand. It's just that they carve out a big exception for something that they think could literally kill everyone on Earth, right? Now I'm, I'm maybe, pro-free market compared to most people, but I've never been a doctrinaire libertarian, right? I think that the free market is actually, it's not some sort of state of nature, right? It's a very unnatural creation that we've made, a very valuable creation, right? But like the true state of nature is someone doesn't like you, they just, send goons over with baseball bats, right? and the idea that we're going to have a free market, but we're not going to have violence, right? That was, that had to be painstakingly created via government, right? And, so the whole, system, where we have free markets only exists because we have, states that are strong enough to enforce that. And the basic goal of the state, it has no more basic goal than to protect the survival of the people in it.
Now we get to hear Scott's thoughts about Sam Altman.
One of the big ironies here is that, like, if you want to, hold Sam Altman to account, for example, like, you don't have to say anything that Sam Altman himself wasn't saying 5 or 6 years ago.
Right. He was calling for this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so the things that he called for in the past, or when he even more recently when he testified before Congress, I very strongly support all of those things.
So why do you think he's pivoted?
I don't know him well enough. I've had all of 3 or 4 conversations with him, and in those conversations he was delightful, and I enjoyed talking to him very much, and I had no idea of what was coming.
This next part of the interview is a question that I'm really glad they had Scott touch on. It's the question I see pretty often of like, won't complexity theory stop AI from taking over the world? It's just too complex. It's too chaotic. The universe just can't be efficiently computed. So AIs are just going to be stuck here on Earth, battling with us humans. They can't really be smarter than us. I mean, it's a pretty weak argument, but it's nice to have Scott, a complexity theory expert, put it to bed in this answer.
So Daniel Fong asked us to ask you.
Send her my regards.
Whether there is something from complexity theory that would bound the potential scaling of neural nets in terms of like, is some issue coming up at later stages?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It's one that I get a lot, and unfortunately, for those who might, hope that complexity theory will stop AI from taking over the world or anything like that, I don't see any principles in complexity theory that would block that, right? And the key is that, like, it is true that complexity theory puts fundamental limits on efficient computation, right? Like if P is not equal to NP, for example, then there will not be a fast algorithm to solve many of the optimization problems that we care about, or to find short proofs of theorems whenever they exist, or things like that. Okay, but now the key is to ask, well, can humans do those things, right? And so, like, if your sword in the stone test, about an AI is that, like, it can't immediately find a proof of the Riemann hypothesis. Well, that's great. Can you find a proof?
Right.
Immediately find a proof of the Riemann hypothesis, right? And so this joke about, like, the person saying, well, I don't have to outrun the bear. I only have to outrun you, right? And so it's much the same with AI and humans, right? The AI doesn't have to outrun the fundamental limits of computation. It only has to outrun humans.
All right, those are all the different clips that I wanted to share with you from Scott Aaronson's recent episode of Win-Win with Liv Boeree and Igor Kurganov. I think it was a great episode overall. There's a few other interesting parts that I didn't clip, so go check that out on their channel, Win-Win, link to in the show notes. One more useful bit of context about Scott Aaronson's AI views. Scott wrote a blog post in March 2023 called, "Why Am I Not Terrified of AI?" And the meat of the argument is that he just rejects the orthogonality thesis, if I understand correctly. And remember, the orthogonality thesis is the claim that you can have an arbitrarily intelligent AI and you can give it any set of values, right? It's not going to converge on the set of values that we think are good because it can have an evil twin that just has, like, the sign of its utility function changed, and it could be equally smart but want bad things instead of good things, right? That kind of claim that those designs are possible, a bad design is possible as an evil twin to a good design, that's the orthogonality thesis. Now, from my perspective, it seems obviously correct. I feel very strongly that the orthogonality thesis is true. But disappointingly for me, Scott doesn't seem to agree at all. So let me just read you an excerpt from his Why Am I Not Terrified of AI post from earlier last year, where he's addressing the orthogonality thesis. So Scott writes, yes, there could be a superintelligence that cared for nothing but maximizing paperclips, in the same way that there exist humans with 180 IQs who have mastered philosophy and literature and science as well as any of us, but who now mostly care about maximizing their orgasms or their heroin intake. But that's a non-trivial achievement. When intelligence and goals are that orthogonal, there was normally some effort spent prying them apart. If you really accept the practical version of the orthogonality thesis, then it seems to me that you can't regard education, knowledge, and enlightenment as instruments for moral betterment. Sure, they're great for any entities that happen to share your values, or close enough, but ignorance and miseducation are far preferable for any entities that don't. Conversely then, if I do regard knowledge and enlightenment as instruments for moral betterment, and I do, then I can't accept the practical form of the orthogonality thesis. World War II was, among other things, a gargantuan civilization-scale test of the orthogonality thesis, and the result was that the more moral side ultimately prevailed, seemingly not completely at random, but in part because, by being more moral, it was able to attract the smarter and more thoughtful people. There are many reasons for pessimism in today's world, but that observation about World War II is perhaps my best reason for optimism. Oh boy. So, I'm glad he has a reason for optimism, but when you look at the Allies winning World War II, yeah, freedom, I do think that within human society, there is a connection where humans who can cooperate with each other and who can lift each other up and entice each other with dreams, right? Humans who can create dreams that excite other humans. These are all advantages in human conflict, right? It's no surprise, the same way that capitalism won over communism. Capitalism, you could say, is morally better. Hey, look, capitalism is morally better than communism, and it also won by generating more economic value. What a win for morality. And these kind of things do dovetail within the human sphere. But when you're talking about AI, you really don't think AI can win World War III or World War IV against humans if it decides to be Nazi? You don't think somebody can build a Nazi AGI that can beat humanity? Because at the end of the day, the Allies actually had more IQ points total on their side, did they not? So when you take the lesson away from World War II that the more moral side won, can't you just also take the lesson that the more intelligent side won? I mean, this just seems to me like reaching. It seems like a reach to take this as a lesson about the orthogonality thesis. My overall takeaway, as you probably gathered, is that this isn't the time for hand-waving and having a philosophical discussion. This is the time to blow the whistle on the AI companies and be like, what are you guys doing? Your own safety teams can't tell you that this is responsible. They don't think that the pace makes sense. They don't think that you've got a handle on what safety will look like when you unearth the next capabilities frontier. The adults in the room on the safety side aren't licensing further progress. It's just something that the AI companies feel like is their only choice. They're never going to stop. No matter how intractable the problem looks like, they're always going to see it as their default mission to just come into work on capabilities, and let the safety people work on safety. The only problem is if the safety people are at square one on safety, barely chipping away at the problem, you're not going to have the adult in the room inside of these AI companies being like, sorry guys, safety progress is too slow compared to capabilities progress, so shut it down. The only voice that's going to say shut it down is a grassroots movement, people like you and me, and of course the government, right? The democratic opinion. As long as people see the urgency of this, of saying what are these AI companies doing? This doesn't make sense. What's going on inside here? This shouldn't be legal, right? That's the only lever that's going to stop it, because you can see from Scott Aaronson's account that the conversations going on inside the AI companies, they're not trustworthy safety conversations, right? It's just kind of like people flinging ideas around, just waiting to turn over the next card and see what happens. Let's see what happens, guys. I don't know about you. While I'm very curious to see what happens, I don't think that it's responsible to see what happens. Right? The adult voice in my mind is saying, you know what, it's better off not to see what happens. But I will admit, I'm just like Sam Altman. I'm very curious. I'd love to see what the next release is. But I don't think we should. I don't think that that's the responsible thing for our species to be doing right now. Hopefully you'll agree. As you know, I'm part of Pause AI, pauseai.info. Join the Pause AI Discord. There's even a channel for the Doom Debates show. Come talk to me on that channel. I hope that this kind of perspective from this episode will motivate you to join that community at least. One more thing I want to show you before we go. I want to make sure that you check out the Lethal Intelligence Guide. It's by my friend Michael, and I've brought it up on a couple episodes now because I think it's the most amazing animation ever made introducing people to the AI doom problem. Today, I'm going to play you a short clip where Michael explains how narrow intelligence can actually become the same type of thing as general intelligence, and it's really just a matter of broadening the domain. That's the only difference, so we shouldn't be surprised to get AGI. AGI is very much just like a better chess AI, except the chessboard just expands out to be the physical universe, but it's not fundamentally different. Like, intelligence is intelligence, search is search, optimization is optimization, and we're getting into broad domains fast. That's kind of the crux of the issue of why doomers are so scared. So without further ado, here is that clip.
At first glance, this AGI, being generally capable in multiple domains, looks like a group of many narrow AIs combined. But that is not a correct way to think about it. It is actually more like a species, a new life form. To illustrate the point, we'll compare the general AGI of the near future with a currently existing narrow AI that is optimized at playing chess. Both of them are able to comfortably win a game of chess against any human on Earth every time. And both of them win by making plans and setting goals. The main goal is to achieve checkmate. This is the final destination, or otherwise called terminal goal. In order to get there though, it needs to work on smaller problems, what the AI research geeks call instrumental goals. For example, attack and capture the opponent's pieces, defend my pieces, strategically dominate the center, etc. All these instrumental goals have something in common. They only make sense in its narrow world of chess. If you place this narrow chess AI behind the wheel of a car, it will simply crash, as it cannot work on goals unrelated to chess, like driving. Its model doesn't have a concept for space, time, or movement for that matter. In contrast, the AGI, by design, has no limit on what problems it can work on. So when it tries to figure out a solution to a main problem, the sub-problems it chooses to work on can be anything. Literally any path out of the infinite possibilities allowed within the laws of physics and nature.
Boom, another great clip. And again, make sure you're watching on YouTube so you can see these beautiful animations. And I'll be linking to the Lethal Intelligence Guide video in the show notes so you can click through and watch the whole video. Thanks for watching. Hey, if you've watched a couple episodes of Doom Debates and you haven't gone over to youtube.com/@doomdebates and smack that subscribe button, this would be a great time to do that because there's amazing episodes coming up next. You don't want to miss those in your feed. So please increment that subscriber count by 1. Every time Doom Debates gets a new subscriber, it takes us that much closer to our mission of raising the level of discourse about AI doom, of encouraging prominent doom skeptics and doom proponents to get together in a high quality forum, like certain other high quality debate forums out there, like Monk Debates. You know, we're building a new debate forum where people are expected to debate. A high quality debate is rewarded and appreciated. You know, raising it way beyond the level where it's happening in politics and on Twitter. Society needs this institution fast. And you can help by just smacking that subscribe button. That's your contribution for the day. Okay, what if you've already done that? Then go to doomdebates.com, subscribe to my Substack too. Bam, another way you can help. All right, thanks for doing all that. And I look forward to seeing you next time on Doom Debates.